Dun, da, 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 ding. Hey everyone, it's Nea from the Food52 Test Kitchen. Welcome to our brand new series, Recipe Drop, where me and the rest of the Test Kitchen team will be releasing new and original recipes for you guys to cook at home. Today I'm baking one of my favorite recipes, mocha snacking cake, which was inspired by a very traditional Swedish recipe, mocha squares. I'm combining the dried ingredients with the fat. We're gonna make our coffee soak. My favorite part, the frosting. Much more moist and tender cake. Okay, she is done. Okay, so I have my stand mixer here. I have my pan. I believe this is a 13 by 9. So I'm gonna grease this. I also have the oven preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So I typically grease my pan and I also use parchment paper. For this, I have avocado oil. So I'm just gonna spray it. I like to use avocado oil just because it's the healthiest in my opinion. You can definitely use butter as well, but since I'm actually using oil in this recipe, I just find it makes more sense to use an oil instead. I like to just press it down. This one actually fits perfectly, so I don't have to cut it. I like to have a little overhang because it makes removing the cake a lot easier. You don't have to use parchment paper when you're baking. If you bake a lot, or even if you don't, it's just, it's the most annoying thing when you've baked a cake and you try to flip it out of the pan and it sticks to the bottom. So now we're gonna mix together the dry ingredients. So I have about 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, about 1/2 cup of natural cocoa powder. There are two main types of cocoa powder. There's a natural cocoa powder, which is 100% cocoa powder, and then there's Dutch processed cocoa powder. Natural cocoa powder is what's most commonly found on the shelves of the grocery store. The main difference is that natural cocoa powder is natural and it's pretty acidic, which also means it's a bit lighter in color and it has that kind of like bitter chocolate flavor. And Dutch processed cocoa powder is basically natural cocoa powder that's been treated with an alkalizing agent. This reduces the acidity and makes it neutral. Because of that, when you're using Dutch processed cocoa powder, you need both an acid and a base in your recipe. And when you're using natural cocoa powder, you have that acid. So more often than not, in recipes that call for natural cocoa powder, the recipe is also gonna call for baking soda, which is a base. Now I'm gonna add 3/4 teaspoon kosher salt. Sometimes I even add a whole teaspoon. I know that sounds like a lot, but salt really improves the flavor of baking recipes. This might be a hot take, but I personally think sifting flour is a waste of time. Gasp. I like to just take a whisk and you can kind of just like fluff it up like that. Especially if you're already weighing your flour, which if you don't have a scale, you should get a scale. I'm using a stand mixer just because I'm gonna make frosting later and stand mixers are the best when making frosting because they really help to incorporate tons of air.
What's your favorite KitchenAid stand mixer color?
Well, the one I have at home is silver. I like it. My dad gave it to me as a gift. However, I really like I think there's a light blue one, if I'm not making that up. Okay, so to this bowl, I'm gonna add a little bit more than 1 cup of granulated white sugar. Uh-oh. I think we need new sugar. So I prepped these ingredients last night and I put it all in the fridge just because, I don't know, there was dairy on my tray. The sugar hardened, so I'm just gonna crush it up. A little more than 1 cup of sugar, 2 room temperatured eggs. One kitchen rule that I do really like to follow is using room temperature ingredients. And this just really helps to blend all the ingredients together and create a much more smoother batter. 1/2 cup of neutral oil. This recipe is actually classically made with melted butter, but for my recipe, I changed it to use a neutral oil instead, and the oil resulted in a little bit more moist of a crumb. 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. I'm gonna mix in the dry ingredients. I'm combining the dry ingredients with the fat before any liquid, and that's because when the fat coats the flour particles first, it lends to, again, a much more moist and tender cake. We don't wanna overmix. So while this is mixing, I have a little saucepan here. I'm gonna heat up some coffee and a little bit of milk. So we have 1/2 cup of milk, and then I'm gonna measure out 1/4 cup of strong black coffee. We want it to be pretty hot, but we also don't want it to boil. And the reason why we don't want to overmix this batter is because it's really important not to incorporate too much air, because when there's too much air, the air bubbles expand in the oven and then deflate, and that can sometimes just make our cake not be as well risen. So the reason why I'm heating this milk and coffee is because it's gonna help to bloom the cocoa powder, which kind of wakes it up and gives the cake a much more like deeper chocolate flavor. So when it comes to chocolate cake, you can actually use only hot water, or in this case, only hot coffee. So if you would want to make this cake dairy-free, excluding the frosting, you could do that by not using any milk and just using hot coffee instead. Ooh, it's hot. To the point where you can't keep your finger in it anymore, I would say. Now with the mixer running on low speed, I'm just gonna pour this in slowly. Not only is this hot milk gonna bloom the cocoa, but it's also gonna kind of temper the eggs. I'm just gonna mix it until the batter is super smooth and there are no more flour clumps remaining. Tasting is the most important part. It's really good. Do I have chocolate on my face? On my lips? No? Okay, go with your, use your discretion. Add a little more salt if you feel like it needs it. I used to bake these a lot with my grandma, and this recipe, or really like any baking recipe, it was just the best thing ever was being able to lick the whisk or the spoon at the end. I'm not gonna do that now. Do a final scrape. Okay, now this is gonna bake 18 to 20 minutes. Okay, you get this. I got the spoon.
Dude, I love batter. For the viewers at home, you guys are missing out if you're not baking along with us right now.
Okay, she is done. So I only let it cool for about 5 minutes. And now we get to use these flaps to transfer over here. To speed things up, I'm actually gonna pop this in the fridge. Not always recommended, but I personally never really see a big difference, so I'm gonna do it anyway. First things first is we're gonna make our coffee soak, and this I'm gonna drizzle over the cake just to add like an extra bit of Coffee-Kahlua flavor and to moisten it up even more. So for the coffee soak, I'm just doing about 1/4 of a cup of the cold coffee and a tablespoon of Kahlua. You can totally leave it out. Now we're gonna move on to my favorite part, the frosting. I know some people are usually either cake people or frosting people when it comes to cake. I'm definitely a frosting person. I'm gonna start by creaming the softened butter. Softened butter is super important because, again, if it's not softened and room temperature, it's gonna be pretty hard to mix into like a smooth whipped butter. Okay, make sure to scrape down the sides. Now I'm gonna go in with about 4 cups of confectioner's sugar. I didn't squeeze this cocoa powder out, so we're taking it straight from the jar. So 1/4 of a cup, which is 4 tablespoons, and then 1 extra tablespoon. I like my frostings really, really light and fluffy and not so buttery. I tend to add a decent amount of confectioner's sugar and stick with a lower amount of butter. So I'm also gonna add a teaspoon of vanilla, or vanilla and chocolate really, really complement each other. I'm also adding another 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. In this cute little thing, I have 1 tablespoon of whole milk and 3 tablespoons of the cold coffee. I'm gonna pour it right in and mix it until it's just combined, and then we can start to increase the speed. And here at this stage, you can kind of gauge your frosting and see if you feel like it's too dry or if you feel like it needs more liquid. Some people might stop at this stage. I mean, obviously all the ingredients aren't completely like mixed in. If you are one of these people, just know that you can take this and make it so much better by just mixing the frosting on high for even just a minute. The more air you incorporate into the frosting, the lighter the cocoa color is gonna be. And this is also gonna make it a lot more easier to spread and give you a better mouthfeel. It looks pretty light in color. Because the frosting is like lighter, there's gonna be frosting from before that's darker on the side. So again, go in, mix it down. So you could either just frost it, decorate it right on here, especially if you're gonna store them for later. But if you're gonna serve them, you can grab a serving platter. So I have this beautiful wooden cutting board by Larchwood, and they have these cute little rubber feet on the bottom to make sure that it doesn't move on your countertop, and it's also antimicrobial, which is really great. So to make sure that the coffee soak really soaks into the cake, I'm gonna prick it with a fork. The original mocha squares in Sweden, they don't include a coffee soak. It's basically just the cake and the frosting isn't even really a frosting. It's more of an icing. But I just wanted to kind of like elevate it a little bit more, so this is my take. I like to just give it a little stir and brush it. I probably wouldn't recommend using all of this because you don't want your cake to be wet, I guess. I'm gonna fluff up this frosting a little bit. These mocha cakes in Sweden actually have several names. So there's kärleksmums, snodas, mockarutor, and yeah, I think that's it. Maybe there's another, I can't remember. So I'm just spreading this out to all the edges, making sure that there's an even layer of frosting across the whole cake. This is where an offset spatula is amazing. Now going in with some, coconut flakes. For this I'm using coconut flakes just because I feel like it gives even more coconut flavor, and I love to have like a lot of coconut in every bite. This is about a cup, by the way. This is again a really great make-ahead recipe. It's great for serving a crowd. It's great for like bringing on a picnic or something. When I'm cutting this cake, I'm thinking about like, how did my grandma used to serve these? And fika in Sweden is a lot about like eating together and sharing and like indulging, but not overindulging. So a lot of times we would get pretty small pieces of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, we got 32 squares. It's kind of crazy. That's a lot. The mocha cake layer with the frosting and the shredded coconut. It looks delicious, and I'm so excited to force everybody around me to taste it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Okay, so here is the final cake. So I'm actually gonna serve these to people in the office on these plates. They're by Thomas Fuchs, and they look like they're ceramics, but they're actually made of BPA-free melamine. They're dishwasher safe, which is always great, and they're perfect for outdoors. Anybody want a sweet treat? Yeah.
Matching.
They're on our new fun plates.
Thank you.
All right, we're coming. Coming with some mocha cake.
Hey.
We're interrupting your lunch.
First time having a mocha cake. AKA my third, and I already know I like
Probably like the fifth.
it.
Oh yeah.
Oh!